Okay, in this lesson we are going to look at corresponding parts of congruent polygons. So we're going to look at two polygons, usually they are triangles or quadrilaterals of some sort, and they are going to be congruent to each other, which means they are going to be the same. They're going to have the same length of sides, the same angle measures, everything about them is going to be the same. And we're just going to look at different parts of these congruent polygons and use some algebra to figure out some stuff. Okay, so corresponding parts, so if two figures are congruent, then the parts of the figure that correspond to one another are congruent to each other. Okay, so in this case, in these triangles down here, triangle JKL and triangle RST, the corresponding parts are the parts that are labeled congruent to each other, and then we are going to make a congruence statement based on how our corresponding parts line up. Okay, so in order to write a congruent statement, we first have to know what our corresponding parts are. So if we look here at our two triangles, you notice they are all marked up with tick marks and lines and all kinds of stuff. So what we want to notice is that side JK, let me erase that there. Side JK has one tick mark, and we also know that side ST has one tick mark. So we know that if they each have one tick mark, they're congruent to each other. So we can say, I'm going to come over here to congruent sides first. We can say that JK is congruent to ST. Okay, so we also can notice that KL has two tick marks and RS has two tick marks. So we can say that KL is congruent to RS. And then last but not least, JL has three tick marks and so does RT. So we can say that JL is congruent to RT. Okay, so that's how we can say our sides are congruent. And then we can also look at the angles. So let's erase my marks on here first. Okay, so let's look at our angles. So I notice on the left, angle L has one tick mark on it, and I notice over here, angle R has one tick mark on it, which means that angle L is congruent to angle R. Moving on, I notice that J has two and T has two, so angle J is congruent to angle T. And last but not least, K has three and S has three, so angle K is congruent to angle S. When we go to write a congruence statement, that means that we are stating that those two triangles are congruent. All their corresponding sides are congruent, all their corresponding angles are congruent, so we can say that they're basically the same triangle, and we can name them. And when we write a congruence statement, we need to write the corresponding parts in the same order. What that means is if I say triangle JKL is congruent to triangle, that means J is congruent to T. Therefore, when I name my triangle, I need to have T be first. K is my second letter. It corresponds to S. So over here, S has to come second. And then L corresponds to R, so R has to come third. So we could say that JKL is congruent to TSR. If we change the order of it a little bit, if we said maybe instead of JKL, we said LJK, then we would have to say that it is congruent to RTS. So the order matters in how you name it when you're saying that two things are congruent to each other. Okay, so now we're going to put a little bit of algebra with it. Okay, so we're going to identify our corresponding parts here, and notice up in the front, or up at the top, excuse me, it says that ABGH, so that's the quadrilateral on the left, is congruent to CDEF, which is the quadrilateral on the right. And notice the order that they are ABGH, which means the order that they're listed up there, up here, their angles correspond to each other. So I'm going to look at our angles first, and I notice, let me erase my highlights up here, that angle A and angle C are listed first, which means angle A is congruent to angle C. And if you notice, angle A and angle C are both right angles, which makes sense. So I'm going to put one little mark in here. Angle A is congruent to angle C. Then if I look at my next letter, I've got angle B and angle D. Therefore, angle B is congruent to angle D. So I'm going to put two little marks on B and two little marks on D. My third one, I have G and E, so angle G is congruent to angle E. So I'm going to go ahead and put, so we have G, three little marks on here, 1, 2, 3, and E is 1, 2, 3. And then our last one is H and F. H and F, so we could say that angle H is congruent to angle F. And we could put 4 tick marks on there, but that's going to cover up quite a bit of information there, so I'm not going to do that right now. If we want to look at congruent sides, okay, if you look at even how it's named up here, AB is the first two, CD is the first two on the other one, therefore AB is congruent to CD. So I can put a tick mark AB and CD. And I can keep going. I can say BG is congruent to DE. So I'd have BG, let's mark that with 2. And DE, let's mark that with 2. And then we would have GH is congruent to EF. So GH and EF. And then our last one would be HA or AH is congruent to FC or CF. So we could mark that also. We could put 4 little tick marks, but again, our picture's already getting pretty busy. So what we need to figure out, it asks find the value of X. Okay, well X is part of angle H. Okay, so we need to ask ourselves, well, what angle corresponds or is equal to angle H? And if you look up here, angle H and angle F are the same. So we know angle F is 105 degrees. So we can say that 4x plus 5 equals 105 because those are corresponding parts and the two polygons are congruent. So that means that their parts are going to be equal to each other. So I can go ahead and subtract 5 and solve it out, and I get x equals 25. Okay, so it doesn't actually ask us to find all of the corresponding angles or congruent sides or anything like that on here. It just asks you to look at the picture, look at the names and the order that the letters are in the names, and you need to find the value of x. So you need to think about where x is and what corresponds to it, and then you have to find the value of y and the angle that corresponds with it so you can set up an equation. So why don't you go ahead and pause the video and see if you can find x and y, and then check back, and if you aren't sure or you have any questions, please raise your hand and let me know. Okay, so hopefully take a look. On the first one, we have x is part of QR, and QR corresponds to FG in the other polygon or in the other quadrilateral. Therefore, our two pink highlights are equal to each other, so we can say 2x minus 4 equals 12 and solve to get 8. And then Q, y is part of Q, the angle Q, so we'd have 6y plus x. And Q corresponds to F, so we can say 6y plus x equals 68. Well, we know that x is 8, so we can say 6y plus 8 equals 68, and then just solve our equation and get x equals 10. Okay, so this one is just thinking a little bit about triangles and some other stuff that we have already learned about. And there's nothing in here that says that anything is parallel lines or anything just yet. So let's just think about what we know. We want to figure out what the measure of angle 1 is. And we know we have a 75-degree angle and a 68-degree angle. We also know by the congruence marks that this angle right here is also 68 degrees, okay? And we can pretty easily figure out the measure of that angle right there because we have a triangle. This is just a triangle. And I know that that red triangle I just wrote, the interior angles have to add up to 180 degrees. So if I add 75 plus 68 and subtract that from 180 degrees, I get that this angle right here is 37 degrees. Okay, and one thing I do know is that this is a vertical angle, so if that's 37 degrees, this is also 37 degrees. And if I have 68 and 37, again, the inside of this triangle here has to equal 180 degrees. And if I have 37 and 68, then angle 1 has to equal 75 degrees. So sometimes some of the stuff that you've learned in previous chapters, like vertical angles and things like that, will come back in this chapter as well. Okay, much like 5.1 was a big ideas homework assignment, there's also a big ideas homework assignment for 5.2. So please complete that and make sure that it gets submitted. Good luck.